Sami. I work with Wrapup.
This meeting is being recorded.
I work with Wrapup, and I'll be a convener for today's panel on devolved finance of climate change adaptation in urban settlements. Please allow me to take you through some of the basic rules in relation to participation in this particular panel. So to begin with, we have 4 panelists who will each be contributing a paper and a presentation, as well as a pre-recorded presentation that has already been submitted. All panelists and participants will be asked to read the papers prior to the conference. And in the first 20 minutes, I'll be spending the time to outline some of the key questions that have been raised by the papers and the presentations. And then thereafter, I'll give each presenter a minimum of 2 minutes to summarize the key arguments, and another 2 minutes to address some of the key questions that are being raised by by my interventions. Thereafter, we'll have an open discussion for about 20 minutes involving the whole of the audience, and I'll be stepping in here and there to act as a moderator. May I please take this opportunity to ask you to limit your interventions to a maximum of 3 minutes, please. So before we get underway, perhaps just a round of introduction, since it's just the 14 of us in this particular panel. I please ask our colleagues, Per Jacob Tiedemann, to introduce himself. Just a very short introduction.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Per Tiedemann. I am a Danish citizen, but associate with Wrapup in Tanzania. My specialty of work is devolved financing for local governments, and only more recently started to work on climate change adaptation. So I work as a consultant in about 25 countries, but most of my time in East Africa.
Thank you very much, Per. Augustin?
Yes, hi. I'm a PhD student at the University of Exeter, and I'm working on climate change adaptation and urban planning in Pacific Islands.
Thank you very much. Giuseppe?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for organizing this panel. I am Giuseppe Forino. I am a lecturer in human geography at Bangor University, UK. I work on disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and recently on climate adaptation finance in urban areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Arabella?
Hello. Good afternoon. Really nice to meet you all. I'm Arabella. I'm a senior lecturer in global development at the Open University. I work on issues of urban risk and adaptation with this angle of financing. I also I'm an associate editor for climate and development. So please do consider any papers for climate and development. We're really keen to get more on financing and more on urban adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you. Marie?
Hi everyone, my name is Marie Carlson. I'm a researcher at the Danish Institute for International Studies, and I work on climate change adaptation, issues to do with natural resource conflicts, and also now with the program on governance of climate change adaptation finance. Thank you.
Okay. Andrew?
Hi, my name's Andrew Hattle. I'm a research consultant focusing on international public climate finance, and I'm collaborating with DESE on their GAP project. Nice to see you all.
Thank you very much. Peter?
Okay, my name is Peter Rogers. I'm a PhD student from University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. And now I'm researching on climate finance in Tanzania. Thank you.
Lucas?
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Lucas. I am a senior researcher at Wrapup. and I have been working on local government financing and financial management. Currently, I am working on the climate change adaptation financing. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Noah?
Hello, everyone. My name is Noah Makula Pauline. I'm a senior lecturer. I work at the University of Dar es Salaam, and my work is on environmental assessments and climate change adaptation. Thank you.
And Beatrice?
Hi, everyone. My name is Beatrice Sumari. I'm a PhD student at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and currently researching on the evolution of climate change adaptation finance. Thank you.
All right, Judith?
Hi, my name is Judith Mulwa. I am a PhD student at Kenyatta University, researching on climate adaptation financing in Kenya from a devolved governance system. Thank you.
Millicent?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Millicent Omala. I'm a PhD student at Kenyatta University in Kenya, and my research is on climate finance and in a devolved system as well. Thank you.
Okay. Now, thank you. Nadif? Nadif? I think you're still muted. Going once, twice. Okay, the chance is gone. So actually, ladies and gentlemen, that was a little bit against protocol, but given the fact that it's just a handful of us here present today, I thought it would be good. I thought it would be a good idea for us to get to know each other before we got the session underway. So I've had the pleasure of reading all 4 of the papers that that have been presented here today, and the one overriding message in all the papers is actually the financing. The different papers address different aspects of the financing, from the relevance of climate change financing in the Tanzanian national budget by Noah Makula and colleagues, all the way to the perspectives on new institutional initiatives for funding adaptation in situs by Giuseppe and colleagues. What I've really enjoyed throughout all papers is that first and foremost, the work is still very much ongoing, and all of the papers are still very much in their foundational phase. The papers are not advocating any definitive conclusions, rather they're providing some really, really important preliminary findings of what has been discovered in the field. And I'm also particularly enamored by the fact that all of these papers are actually empirical in nature. They're making use of case studies from the developing South, from Kenya and Tanzania in the case of the 3 papers, to Hanoi and Manila in the case of the paper from our colleagues from the Open University. So in terms of my general observations with respect to the papers, is actually more to do with the substance. I realize that the timing for this particular conference may have been a little bit challenging for you, in that you're not able to fully develop more comprehensive frameworks of analysis in as far as explaining how the different dynamics of climate adaptation finance unfold at the national levels as well as at the sub-national levels. And with respect, for instance, the first paper on climate change relevance of Tanzanian national budget and scale of devolution, I appreciate the level of detail that's in the paper with respect to the statistics, but there's also the question of how that seems to be missing from the paper. More specifically, one of the study's key findings is actually the lack of discretion by local governments over climate change adaptation finance, and unfortunately, the paper doesn't exactly go into much detail in explaining how and why this is actually the case. One would have gathered that this would have been a perfect opportunity for the paper to actually utilize an analytical framework, such as, say, an institutionalist approach, or perhaps a political economy approach to this, and try and really delve into the nitty-gritties of how matters in relation to discretion actually unfold in practice. And also the issues in relation to decision-making within the respective branches of government. This is something which is quite important in terms of not just determining the budget allocation of climate change finance, but also crucially in terms of determining where the seats of power actually lie. So who actually gets to make the decision, and how is this decision being made, and how are these decisions also being formed. That's an area that I believe this first paper would have actually added a lot more value had it included it as part of the discussion. Nonetheless, I think this is a very promising paper, and since I believe that it's still a work in progress, I still very much welcome the authors to further examine these particular aspects of the devolved financing in the next step of the analysis. Second, on the paper on the degree of devolution on international adaptation finance in Kenya and Tanzania. This is by Esben Fries and colleagues. Well, the paper actually looks at the nature of international adaptation finance received in Kenya and Tanzania, with particular emphasis on the extent to which the projects are devolved, and potentially on the responsiveness of finance to local government communities' local priorities. But however, in keeping in common with the rest of the papers in this particular panel, the work is still very much preliminary, and I was really hoping to see a more substantive discussion on the how, and in terms of explaining the dynamics that are involved. Unfortunately, this is the bit that seems to be missing. But the greatest caveat is that I understand this is a piece of research that has only just begun, and the team has at least 4 years of conducting comparative primary research in this particular area. And I believe this is an area that could immensely benefit the quality of the paper in its coming iterations. So crucially, we're talking issues in relation to the three main parameters that paper seeks to be examining. One is the extent to which the finance is being managed through local government accounts. Here, I believe some further qualitative interviews, as well as accounts of the different power dynamics within the different levels of government in the two respective countries can actually go a long way towards explaining how finance is being managed through local government accounts. And crucially, there's also an issue of the way in which projects in the respective national budgets are considered to be devolved. Again, this is a question that would also benefit from having a much more advanced analysis of the political economy that surrounds the devolution of climate change budgets in the two respective countries. Lastly, there's an issue of the use of participatory planning arrangements for the management of adaptation finance. Once again, the dynamics of how this actually plays out in practice seems to be missing. But crucially here, I believe there's also an issue of trying to interrogate what the de jure and the de facto situations really are, because in most of this, in most countries that claim to be practicing devolution, there's always a disconnect between what policy says and what practice actually states. And so I believe more substantive fieldwork would go a long way towards unpacking some of these issues. Crucially, the issue of the differences, if any, that exist between the de jure and the de facto in as far as participatory planning is concerned. On the third paper, this is on transforming urban adaptation finance, critical perspective on new institutional initiatives for funding adaptation in cities. Well, crucially, I believe this is very much a paper in this is very much work in progress. And just to sum up, this is work that very much investigates three forms of adaptation finance. One being multilateral finance mechanisms, two, the bilateral donor / network brokered, and three, community-based experiments, as well as the trying to unpack the black box that relates to the interconnected, powerful, and influential actors, the decision-making mechanisms, the long-term complex and dynamic perspectives. So, with respect to this particular piece of work, it was a little bit difficult to actually follow the discussion. Since I believe the way in which the paper was put together, it very much resembled PowerPoint slides, but then the recorded message did actually go somewhere towards providing a much clearer picture. But crucially, I was surprised by the choice of the research to use two conceptual frames, because there's actually little complementarity between the two proposed frames. One, the critical institutionalism framework of analysis, and the other one being the science policy studies, as I believe is actually a branch of institutionalism that can actually allow for the adoption of how technical knowledge is shaped by certain social and political commitments. I believe within institutionalism, there's several different strands. For instance, sociological institutionalism, as well as discursive institutionalism, or even constructivist institutionalism. I mean, Colin Hay has done some amazing work in this particular front. Even Vivian Schmidt has done some work in the past on discursive institutionalism. And therein lies a provision for considering the formation of institutions such as local financing adaptation. So therein lies the ability to consider how the formation of such institutions goes through the engagement in the process of deliberating, generating, and legitimizing ideas about political action in the institutional context according to a logic of communication. So I strongly urge the authors to also consider merging these frameworks of analysis, so to try and have a more comprehensive take and a more consistent approach to how the analysis will be done, because as things stand, the two proposed frameworks don't exactly speak very well to one another, and it may even end up raising questions as to regards to the merits of having the separate frames, as well as the strengths and the weaknesses that inherent within it. And this is something that I believe will end up creating a methodological diversion from something which is much more from the more nuanced understanding of the context in this particular instance is the differences that actually exist between the multilateral finance mechanisms, bilateral donor or network brokered, as well as community-based experiments. I believe having a unified analytical framework would actually provide plenty of grounds for rich comparative assessment of how adaptation occurs within this particular three frameworks. And so in with respect to the fourth paper, it's a paper that looks to map climate adaptation finance in Kenya's devolved governance system using a case study of Makueni County. Once again, in common with the rest of the papers in this particular forum, in this particular panel, this is very much a work in progress. but it's very much a work in progress. And I was struggling to see the so what. So basically, on the one hand, while we appreciate the capability to fully establish the scale of financial flows between the national budget and the subnational government and the subnational government, but then with respect to the political economy framework, or with respect to the political science aspect of the study, one also needs to consider the so what. So basically, what will us knowing of the sizes of the transfers actually tell us, and what sense can we make? How can we be able to piece different pieces together in terms of the budgetary flows vis-a-vis what's actually transpiring on the ground? So this is an area that I think this study will actually do best to further investigate. So the issue in relation to how decisions on allocations actually come about, and also issues in relation to the differences between flows of money from the different sources. So flows of money from the central government vis-a-vis flows of money from the county government, and how and what explains these differences, and how these differences are actually having an effect in practice. The study also shows, the preliminary analysis also shows some strong correlation between climate-friendly policies and the flow of funds for climate change at the county level. But then again, at this level, one would actually be expecting to see a lot more than that. So it's not just a question of the correlation numbers, but also an explanation of what the correlation actually tells us. And crucially, is the capability to definitively explain allocations and flows of money in the context of concrete climate-friendly action on the ground. So in the main, this paper, it very much doesn't depart from what the other papers have done to date. And I believe that there's plenty of scope and plenty of room for improvement in future iterations. Having said that, we also did receive some comments from other panelists, and we had a comment from Giuseppe Furino, who very much thanked colleagues for bringing experience from Kenya and Tanzania. Giuseppe Furino's comments are very much in line with what I've been talking about up until now. And he's very much interested to discuss how priorities are decided to allocate funds to a specific intervention or specific area, particularly taking into account the role of stakeholders other than national governments, and specifically by taking into considerations the plans, strategies and budgets, as well as fund providers. Giuseppe Furino, he's adamant that this can tell us a lot about how funds are distributed, for which reasons, and on which scientific, social, even political baseline. The other comment that we got from one of the other panelists was from Pierre Tiedemann. Once again, he also made a general comment on the basis of all four papers that have been presented today. His comments very much reflect on the mapping of climate change funds in the various settings, and the use of different methodologies. And Pierre Tiedemann believes that it will be useful to dwell a little bit on the urban aspect of devolution in the two countries. So for him, he is very much interested in the case of Kenya and Tanzania, and would very much prefer to understand the similarities and the differences when it comes to urban devolution in Kenya and Tanzania, so as to provide the building blocks towards a more comprehensive comparative assessment of the the devolution of adaptation finance in the two respective countries. And on that note, let me hit a pause and allow our presenters to come in and provide a 2-minute summary of their works, as well as followed by another 2-minute summary of their responses to the issues that have been raised in my interjections, as well as that from other panelists today. Shall we start with paper number 1, which was by Noah Makula? Dr. Makula?
Thank you, Jamal. I think you have done my work already of summarizing what the paper is all about. Just to reiterate that climate change adaptation in Tanzania is financed by both international development assistance and by national generated revenue. And our paper focused on analyzing the climate change adaptation relevance of the national budget from 2014 to 2022. And we used or applied the methodology that was previously applied by Yanda et al. 2013. And also we preliminarily assessed the degree of which climate change adaptation finance is devolved to the local government. Therefore, the preliminary findings shows that this proportionally high proportion of climate adaptation finance is used at the central levels, and because priority setting also is made at that level, that is at the ministry level. And the study moreover finds that local governments lack discretion over climate change adaptation finance due to the country's highly centralized policies, practices, and procedures. And looking at our qualitative fieldwork that we recently conducted, findings from that fieldwork also indicated nearly all climate change finance accessed by local government comes with a central government tag. So the money allocated to the local government authorities have directives on how to be used. So that is a summary of preliminary findings from our research. And if I go straight to the question that you posed, that the paper lacks the how and why. This is the case, the issue of lack of discretion. Yes, as you point out, this is a preliminary analysis, and we take on board the suggestions and comments from you that the analysis take into account the analytical frameworks such as the political economy, and to see how matters related to discretion unfold in this centralized governance system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pauline. Next up is Pierre.
Yes. Yeah. Hello, Jamal. Hello, everybody. Yeah. Let me start off by just highlighting a few points from the paper, which is a comparison of the degree of devolution of donor funds for climate change adaptation in Kenya and Tanzania. And I thought one of the things that surprised me, I mean, in the analysis where we look at both the actual data and from OECD, and also we look at the institutional framework for management of devolved funding. One of the things that struck me when I was making the comparison is how different the local government systems actually are in Kenya and Tanzania. They're both pretty devolved compared to the rest of Africa, but the systems are very different, and therefore I think they will provide an interesting case study once we start the the more in-depth field work in the two countries. Just to highlight that in Kenya, you have these very huge, quite highly empowered county governments with an average population of 1.4 million people, and where they basically can control all the funds. All the funds that they receive are discretionary. They can decide on how they spend the funds. In Tanzania, the situation is very different, where you have a large, higher number of local governments. You have an older system of local government management, smaller local governments, and you have hardly any discretion. Less than 5% of the total budget is actually a budget that the local governments can control in terms of sectoral allocations. So there's a quite different fiscal space in Tanzania. On the other hand, the local governance structures are not really fully established in Kenya. You know, when they introduced the Constitution of 2010 and created these new huge counties, they also abolished the smaller local governments. So that means, for instance, at the moment, you don't have any real local government structures for the urban structures in Kenya. And I think that provide, of course, limited institutional structures for addressing the particular urban issues. And I think that will be interesting to analyze as we work along in the two countries as to what difference does that really make on the ground. And then in the analysis of how the OECD tagged the OECD fund, the climate change adaptation funding that are from the OECD database, how that is the degree to which it's been devolved in the two countries. I was also quite surprised, first of all, by the figures from OECD that they claim that over these in this period we analyze, there's been more than $2 billion of climate change adaptation finance in Tanzania and around more than $3 billion in Kenya. And the surprising thing is when we do the initial analysis of how the extent to which that has been devolved to local governments, that the number is far higher in Tanzania, around 43%, whereas around only 5.5% in Kenya. And that makes us, I mean, that's something to look into, Jamal. And you're right. I mean, we are not in this particular stage of the research. We are not yet coming up with a political economy analysis of why things exactly are as they are. But I think we are on a good track in terms of mapping out what the situation is, and then the next stage will be to explore both on the donor side and the government side. What is it that explains the different degree of, for instance, discretion in the two countries, and also the actions of the development partners, why they have positioned themselves so differently in the two countries. Maybe in terms of local decision making, I think this particular paper does not analyze how decision-making processes are playing out, but it provides an overview of the degree to which the institutional framework provide different opportunities in the two countries, which will then form the basis for analysis in the next stage of actual field work, which will be conducted to a large extent by the PhD students. So that's all.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Next is Giuseppe Foreno and Arabella.
Hello, thank you very much. Yeah, first of all, thank you for your comments about this, the linkage between the two theories. Actually, we welcome it, and Arabella and I will think about it, because we still think it's useful to try to provide a clear linkage across these two theories, and then they can inform each other. In terms of our paper, actually, this work we are doing, part of this work we are doing has been submitted to a journal and is in revision. So hopefully we could have good results soon in order also to refine our findings. I just wanted to highlight a bit our framework for analyzing adaptive finance, which at the end was work more on documents on climate adaptation finance in urban areas of the Global South. We will then refine our work specifically for the Philippines and Vietnam. We use the framework aiming at understanding how climate adaptation finance projects were able to address 4 urban factors. Let's say one is complexity, so which are the long-term dynamic and intersectoral perspectives that these projects aim at targeting. Another is uncertainty, so which are the climate modeling and simulation. Another is transformation, so how this project aim at upscaling their impacts or at translating in other sectors and areas, and how these projects aim at targeting vulnerabilities, vulnerable group, and root causes. I will not go too much into the specific, but I think what Per was saying is quite relevant for what we have found. So these projects sometimes are a bit randomly. They don't have still big priorities and, let's say, a very, very climatic or social or political or social background. For example, we are demonstrated that first of all, that the local level don't control too much all the process of finance. So they are merely executor of funds that are provided top down from national governments or from development banks or UN agencies and so on. And also the kind of projects that are financed are mainly hard or infrastructural projects, while there are there is less attention on social and cultural understanding of climate and of adaptation. The same, the climate background, the climate how can I say, the climate modeling that has been used are quite generic climate modeling. Sometimes they are also taken from international documents, so they have limited relevance for the context where they are going to apply these adaptation projects. And even for catalytic and upscaling effects, the project expect to have some effects or to have impacts beyond the city and beyond the sector they are going to implement their activities. However, it's still not clear the scale and whether and how and for how much time and with which resources these impacts from the project can have effect on other cities or on other sectors. And the same about vulnerability. There is, of course, a mentioning about vulnerability, vulnerable groups, particularly women, indigenous groups, or young people. And there is also mentioning to participation and to gender issues. However, they are still unable to address the root causes of vulnerabilities and how to move, how to understand why vulnerability has been produced and which can be the solution to tackle this vulnerability. So, in light of this, we believe that climate adaptation finance is really an opportunity to tackle very important issues at the urban level. However, at this point, their objectives are still relatively vague and still need more understanding of the local needs, and still to rely more on bottom-up, let's say, approaches rather than merely guided by top-down forms and by just national governments or funding providers. So yeah, I would say that these are the main points that we would like to discuss, and let's hope that we can provide final results with the paper to be published soon, hopefully. So thank you very much. I don't know if Arabella wants to add something, but thank you from my side.
No, just thanks. I know we're up against time completely, Jamal, so I won't take it, but really interesting. We're coming from a different place, but there's an intersection, I think, with Per's point about how these international climate finance actors, the importance of their structures and agenda in feeding into contexts where there are also different devolution processes going on. We haven't got to that point. We were looking very much at that interface from the international structures, what that meant for urban projects. But I think that's quite an important dimension to take into account. But I think we're all headed in this broad political economy direction and wanting to get into now the kind of qualitative political work to really understand the how. So thank you.
Thank you both. Judith and Edward?
Thank you very much. I'll be speaking on behalf of Edward. Well, yeah. So this paper appreciates, of course, the history of adaptation finance and also contextualizes this in the context of Kenya. And in this regard, we see that there are existing policies, strategies, and frameworks in the effort of tracking adaptation financing at national level. But this also streams into the devolved system, and we're using Makueni as a case study. And this is because Makueni has been a champion since I think the devolved system came into place. And it's very different as compared to other countries in terms of spearheading the implementation of adaptation finance. So there are institutionalized, mechanisms such as the County Climate Change Fund, the County Integrated Development Plans, the bills, and the fund that has enabled Makueni County to excel as far as climate adaptation finance is concerned. The paper also shows that the international development assistance takes the largest chunk as far as provision of climate adaptation finance is concerned, contrary to the national government allocations or the Makueni County allocations, which is 2% of the national government allocation, and the fuel levy fund. We do appreciate the comments made by Jamal in terms of the so what. I think this will come in as these are just preliminary findings based on data that was sent to us from the county government. But then now, as we are going to the field or undertaking our field work, we're going to analyze documents, agreements that would make sense of the so what question. In terms of an explanation and the correlation also, this would be explained again moving forward. And then just to highlight a few issues in terms of the priorities, I appreciate this question. And just to mention that at national level, there isn't really much a participatory angle because a lot of, or rather financing from national level is usually through parliamentary discussions and allocations. However, the participatory angle, which then deems the priorities at Makueni County as a case study, is usually at the ward committees, and we're going to share the structure moving forward of how the social political context or even like the institutionalized context will be looking into or looks at in terms of the priorities where the villages actually are involved and they identify the issues, but then also the ward committees then prioritize, of course, the issues as far as climate adaptation finance is concerned. Also regarding the role of stakeholders, very good question, which will also will come in pretty soon. But just to mention, preliminary findings say or show that other than the national government, the rest of the stakeholders come in in terms of complementing what the county government has prioritized, both financially and non-financially. But then, of course, more is going to come on the same. Thank you very much for the questions and the comments.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, authors, for that very brief but succinct account of your work. We now have a few minutes to spend on having a Q&A and even some discussion on some of the issues that are coming out. I can read through the chat box. There's a comment from Pierre. It talks about he's surprised about the level. Oh, he's making a comment on Judith's paper, and particularly his. Well, first and foremost, he says nice paper. However, he's surprised about the high level of IDA funding. Could you please share more information about the IDA project in Makueni?
Thanks, Pierre. Yes. So the data we got this was financing from, I think, the Swedish government, but we didn't really get into, reading the project documents, because I have to go to the county to request them for this information. But I will definitely share with you. This is a Swedish project that has been funded for 6 years. And that's why it's taking the largest chunk as far as adaptation is concerned. But they didn't really release information on what the project was about and all that kind of information. But this is what, in the next few weeks, that I will be going to collect, and I will definitely share with you. Thanks.
Thanks. Jamal, I think one of the things we all agreed about was the need for digging a bit deeper into the way that we will undertake political economy analysis of how to explain the patterns of climate change adaptation and so forth. I don't know if there's some preliminary thoughts to be shared. Jamal, I think you actually started to work on a paper on that. Maybe you can say a bit about what direction it is going.
Sorry, I've forgotten to unmute. Yes, I'm currently working on a PEA, on a PEA of adaptation finance in Tanzania. And what I've managed to do is to create an annotated outline. I'm just trying to find what the paper is so that I can share with you some of the key variables that are important, that are actually important in this kind of analysis. But crucially, any different PEA needs to address a handful of things. One of them being the fact that it's the identification of the key actors. Who are the key actors and the power relations that exist among them? And then also issues in relation to the circles of influence. Who gets to call the shots? Yeah, there it is. So who gets to call the shots? And then the issues in relation to having a fairly decent understanding of, because when we talk about decentralized climate financing, we're actually talking about multiple aspects within the broader framework of governance. So decentralized climate financing, we're talking about climate, we're talking about financing, also talking about the decentralization processes. So it's important for any PEA to also have a fairly comprehensive understanding of the decentralization processes within that respective case area. And then the issues in relation to also understanding the political economy of climate change within the particular area as well, and also the political economy financing, general financing within the particular case area. And then that will actually be a case of you trying to piece together the different insights from these three separate PEAs: 1 of decentralization, 2 of financing, and 3 of climate change, into more comprehensive and sharper, comprehensive and sharper analysis. So crucially, that can also entail getting a fairly comprehensive understanding of the historical institutions that exist, the distribution of powers, and the institutions that are inherent in that particular case area. And then the issues in relation to, especially when it comes to financing, one also has to understand the sources of financing are also quite important within any particular political economy analysis. So if the money comes from domestic sources, then naturally the political settlements, the domestic political settlements would have a significant impact in explaining how that particular financing gets extracted and gets used. And whereas if the money comes from abroad, then also issues in relation to how the institutional effect of these supranational entities will have in terms of shaping up the use of money from abroad. And then lastly, any discussion of PA also has to consider the incentives that the different actors do face, because whether a decision ends up being made or not, that will depend on the sort of incentives that are on the table of any particular decision maker. And then therein, that will also end up defining the power structures that prevail in terms of the overarching institutional framework for that for the decentralization of adaptation finance within that particular case area. So a PA analysis is whilst it's important, but it's also important. What is important is first and foremost to learn of the different aspects that are involved in a PA analysis, but also crucially to also have an understanding that this will actually be a fused analysis of the political economy of different aspects. One, the political economy of decentralization, two, the political economy of financing, and three, the political economy of climate change. Any failure to do so may end up losing out on the broader dynamics that can potentially shape and mold things in the field.
Jamal,
I see a hand being raised.
Yeah,
yes?
that was me. Sorry, I know we're out of time, and this is really interesting, and the approach you're putting forward is really interesting and comprehensive. But there's kind of synergies. I was in the African Cities Research Consortium session this morning about political settlements and using political settlements analysis, and so there's interesting kind of overlaps, I guess, that I think it would be really kind of interesting to pursue. And I ask them because they look at particular domains of development, urban development, but they don't look at either disaster risk or climate change. And they said they will be doing some work about how climate change coalitions are coming together within broader political settlements within cities. But I thought it was quite interesting that there were overlaps.
Absolutely. Arabella, you just got disconnected. So are there any comments from anyone else? Unfortunately, Arabella got disconnected. Going once, going twice. Okay. So let me take this opportunity to thank all of you for your insightful contributions today. I've really enjoyed going through the papers and as well as the recordings. I'll get in touch with the organizers of the conference to make sure that we all receive copies of what has transpired this afternoon. And I wish you the very best in further implementation of your studies. And we do look forward to reading more advanced copies of your research. Thank you all. And bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Jamal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal.